All right, we're on live stream now. So welcome everybody on live stream.
And a cookie.
I see ya.
2 jackets today. 3. Very good.
Let me just
Well, I've got 4 layers on right here.
adjust that a bit.
More layers. Got 2 more t-shirt layers.
Yeah. You might want to keep those at least 1 layer on. It's a little. Oh, she got the heat lamp.
So we're
Did we turn
yes.
that on yet?
So we're live streaming. Let's all wave to everybody on live stream. So Phil is going to lead today, but I just wanted to say that the pastors they have a meeting that will last for most of this discussion, so they won't be here. But Reverend Kathy actually emailed us some thoughts we can share. Also, Dr. Darrell, who's usually here calling in, he was away last week because of a loss in the family, and this week he has a medical procedure. It sounds like they're all keeping up with the reading. In fact, Reverend Kathy is ahead of us, I think. So,
all right.
So with that said, I'll turn it over to Phil.
Yeah. So let me ask how you all are doing with your reading. Are folks managing to keep pace with the schedule?
Yeah. I'm okay. Oh, go ahead. Just that was Myla. Yes.
Okay. All right. Good.
Yeah, I'm a day behind, but trying to catch up.
Yep. Okay. So we left off last week. I'm just going to sort of set the table here for us. I think we were in Deuteronomy, and this week's reading covered Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then we get into 1 Samuel.
Could I interrupt you for
Yeah.
that? I forgot Tim also checked in and
Yeah.
said that he had a conflict, so I just wanted to...
Yep. And he sent us some very interesting he sent us an interesting passage that I'll bring up a little bit later. So that's kind of setting the table for us. You know, coming out of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, where we had all the laws and the different inheritance rights, and then Joshua came in following Moses, and then we have the Judges. Joanna sent the nice timeline of the Judges this week, right?
Of the Judges and the Kings.
And the Kings.
Oh, excuse me. I'm gonna just let, I think Deidre is over here now. One of them, let them know that I'm here, but I'm gonna do the Bible for 90 days.
Okay.
And see what I can,
Okay.
All right.
sing with, practice with them on Sundays.
All right.
I had a problem with the King's document. I don't know. It didn't open.
Oh, it didn't? I can resend it.
Anybody else have a problem with the King's document? Okay. All right. Maybe
Actually,
just.
I guess I must have overlooked it. So I guess you sent that this week. I must have overlooked it.
I sent it this morning. I can resend it because as I remember, because I have different versions saved in different formats, so I'll resend a different format tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right. With that being said, I'm just going to throw this out there. Were there any final kind of laws at the beginning of this week's readings that that stood out to you? I will share one, and I've been waiting to share this nugget with folks. but it really stuck with me. Deuteronomy 25.
I'm sorry, Phil. I was on mute and you couldn't hear me.
Oh,
I didn't
okay.
hear what you asked about the question.
Yeah, so just wondering if, as we started this week's reading, ending with the laws and things of Deuteronomy, were there any that stuck out to you before we kind of plow into Joshua and some of the great stories of Samson and Delilah and David and Goliath and Ruth and Naomi? Those are sort of the great stories that stuck out to me this week. But I didn't, I just wanted to ask folks if there were any kind of oddballs before we get into those stories in Deuteronomy that stuck out to you.
I made a note here about the Deuteronomy 14, verse 19 and 20 that I found curious, but I didn't write down what I found it curious about. Let me take a look at it real quick.
So that's Deuteronomy 14. It's about the clean and unclean.
14, 19, and 20.
Okay. About the clean and unclean food, and the flying insects that swarm are unclean to you. Don't eat them. But the winged creature you may eat. Don't eat anything.
I found that curious about not eating insects. I guess it never occurred to me that somebody would want to do that.
Yeah. And there's one of my favorites. Do not eat anything you find that's already dead, but you can give it to someone else.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. So the laws for us are a little different than the laws maybe for these other people. Okay.
And I guess also cooking a young goat in its mother's milk. Cook it in another goat's milk.
I know, right?
I looked that up. There were various. It's a saying, but there were various interpretations
about what it meant.
About what it meant. There was everything from, just the symbolism of making sure you're giving the best and first of of what you have, and so you're not sort of waiting too long. So the interpretation wasn't necessarily that you're cooking the animal in its mother's milk, but while they're still nursing from their mother, while they're so there were different interpretations of that. That was, but no one seemed to agree exactly what it meant. But that it was just like kind of a saying that meant something different than literally.
Okay, good, interesting.
I've never seen that many laws and rules and regulations and, and all of what was happening at that time.
That meant something different than literally. Interesting.
We're having Rose.
Yeah.
We're having a similar problem as before. If someone has the live stream on, you can't have the sound up while you're talking on the phone.
Actually, my live stream was muted.
Okay.
So I don't think it's coming from me.
Okay.
One other thing in Deuteronomy 22:5, that dressing in drag is not a good thing. Women can't wear men's clothes, and men aren't to wear women's clothes.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on that, Rose. There seems to be a lot of sort of masculine and feminine roles and rules that are to be applied to men and women. In Deuteronomy 25, verse 11, and this is the oddball that stuck out to me. If two men are fighting and the wife of one of them comes to rescue her husband, and she reaches out and seizes him by the private parts. You shall cut off her hand. Show her no pity. And I thought, well, really, is this happening a lot? That it's happening so often that we have to make a law about it? Like wives are coming out to rescue their
And also, don't men kind of recover from that after a couple of hours or whatever? But she'll lose her hand like for life. So I guess the male genitalia is so valuable and prized.
Yes. Well, right. Back to Pastor Dwayne's comment the first week about, the seed being the most valuable, precious, holy thing and procreating and all of that. So I just found that a little bit, some of the Old Testament kind of invokes my internal like comic strip, and that just seemed kind of cartoonish to me.
Right.
Okay. How about Joshua? Moses kind of passed the torch to Joshua. What were folks? Go ahead, Joanna.
I think in Joshua, what always strikes me is probably the most popular story about Jericho.
And the blowing of the horns, and Rahab, the prostitute.
Right, and I think we had some discussions in previous sessions where people did research where that found that some interpretations is not prostitute. Some interpretations actually have her as a businesswoman or something, which actually seems more consistent with the story, because she seems to be someone who has family. She brings her, parents and her siblings. Not someone who would be, that I don't know. I mean, I don't know that time, and that just seems like they would have had, more stability than what I would envision, someone who was a prostitute. But the fact that they saved her after she helped them, and the fact that it seems like later on, I forget where it is, I think she's in some important person's family history. And so it is, what we've talked about, and what we in a lot of the reading this week, is just how contradictory at times. At times, women seem to be treated a certain way, and then other times, like this story, she's her own person. She seems to be a very intelligent, independent woman.
And the saying when you said that, you just made me think of Deborah.
Right.
But I want to go back to Rahab, because you said maybe she wasn't a prostitute. So my footnote in Joshua 6, it's verse 17, where it says, only Rahab, the prostitute, and it very clearly says prostitute, but then there's a footnote, at least in my version of the Bible in 90 Days, says, the footnote is, or possibly innkeeper.
Right. That's not in mine.
Oh, really?
They took the footnote out.
That one I had in my house, the hardback.
Yeah.
And I maybe the softback. And in part of the index where they had the reading that, it's different.
Yeah.
It's because I looked at it, I said it's different. I had to pull this one out.
They reformatted the newer version.
So, ladies on the phone, what is your twist on Rahab the prostitute? Is she an innkeeper? Is she a businesswoman? How did you read that?
Well, good prostitutes are business.
Indeed.
I don't have that little note in mine either, so I must have an older version.
Yeah.
I have it in mine. I have one of the oldest versions, and my footnote is in there where it says possibly innkeeper.
Maybe she was both.
Yeah.
Could have been.
Good all.
And there's another theory. And Carla, did you join us? I thought I heard someone else join.
I did. I'm here.
Okay.
Here.
I'm a big viewer of the History Channel and the Discovery Channel,
Uh-oh.
and they had this theory about the walls coming down around Jericho, and they had this interesting theory about the cord that the Israelites asked her to leave hanging from her a window because her home was in the wall, and the theory was that during the 7 days the Israelites were blowing their horns. They were actually sending reinforcements through
Her window. Huh.
So that when the final blow, the blowing of the horns on the 7th day, that it was actually a signal for the people who had gotten in to actually attack from the inside, etc. I just thought that was an interesting theory that they were showing on the show on television.
Okay.
That is interesting, Joanna, and I too am a big fan of the History Channel, although I won't tell you what I watch. However, there is some of the things that I've seen on TV about back in those days, possibly there being sound technology, and that the blowing of the horns and the stomping of the feet or whatever they did, the noise that they made, the vibrations, loosened the wall.
Huh.
The foundations of the wall, so that when they gave that final big blast, that also helped to bring the wall down. And I don't know, in the back of my brain, I remember hearing somewhere that the red cord, to this day, led to the symbolism of, quote unquote, the red light district, where you could go to find ladies of the evening. That whole red cord, red light is sort of tied together.
Huh.
Has anybody else heard that?
No.
Yeah, I read that, learned that, heard that somewhere, and I can't back it up, but I understand in my mind that red cord symbolized the home of a prostitute, or quote unquote the red light district.
That would be interesting.
Maybe someone should Google that.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure, I welcome it. Yeah.
Good. So, great stories in Joshua. What else stuck out to folks?
For me, if I can still say some quick, the circumcision at Gilgal, chapter 5. I thought it was curious that the Israelites had stopped circumcising themselves, and I think this was the first note that I had, at least for me, because it was commanded back in Genesis as their covenant with the Lord that, all boys born had to be circumcised after the 8th day. And then we get to Joshua 5, and the Israelites had to take time out from battle to circumcise themselves again.
Yeah, that surprised me too.
And following up on that point, I'm very curious, what was the, significance or importance of having the men circumcised at such a young age, and why was that so important? I haven't been able to figure that one out yet. Is it a cleanliness issue, or?
Well, I think doing it at a young age is so they're not traumatized. They kind of forget. And then the idea of circumcision, I think, is first of all, and cleanliness. It's easier for the woman, and the guys in the room can maybe back this up. Maybe it's some myth about making them stronger or whatever. I don't know. I feel a little awkward talking about this remotely.
No, that's okay. I think in previous discussions about this, the cleanliness, hygiene, and modern science has proved that to be somewhat true in terms of the passing communicable diseases, for instance, are more, like HIV, are more easily passed, I guess, because a uncircumcised man could retain just more bacteria and things like that, as opposed to an uncircumcised, as opposed to a circumcised man. So I think some modern science has begun to catch up with some of these Old Testament biblical hygiene and health edicts. I think though that if I put myself in, we're going back to Abraham. That was Abraham's covenant with the Lord. Was, the Lord said, you're going to be special people, and the way we're going to note that you're special is because you're going to be circumcised. So I think the other piece of that for me, and this is just me, and Canute is the gentleman in the room, chime in here, I think is a tribal sort of, like some tribes, there's scarring and there's tattooing and there's all this other stuff to note that you are separate. And I think that's a piece of this. And maybe the health thing was just thrown in for good luck, and happened to be a kicker as opposed to the main thing.
I would also say, obviously it's not, if you had to invent this as something new, it's not probably likely that a lot of people would come up with that idea. So if you want to set people apart, this is kind of an unusual way to do it. And so the likelihood was high that no other tribes or other people had that custom to kind of, confuse those, or, if you want to set up a special way to do it. Obviously the Israelites were forbidden to use tattoos, so I'm sure that was way more common among certain tribes, and, or piercings or certain art kinds of that, and those were, I think literally forbidden for the Israelites. And so this was an easy way to do it without using ink on your body or a piercing.
I go with that.
And not to belabor the point, it's my understanding that it's more pleasurable for the man if he is circumcised. It's more pleasurable. And that also takes me back a little bit. We can go back a little bit to Deuteronomy 22:13-24, where the woman had to prove her virginity. Am I wrong? I don't know if any Hebrew men to ask this, or people to ask this, but when the boys are circumcised today, isn't it part of the tradition to keep the foreskin? And it's sort of like back then when women had to prove their virginity, according to Deuteronomy, the family kept.
Could I ask Rose? Could I ask maybe we can discuss this in email format?
Absolutely.
because we still have 5 books to go through in 35 minutes, and we also want to keep our live stream G-rated.
Yes.
Oh yes, I'm so sorry. Please do forgive me. Like I said, I didn't want to belabor it. I'm happy to yield. Thank you.
No problem. So Joshua, what else? Anything else in Joshua? The big thing was, to me, and the highlight of the book of Joshua was, of course, Jericho and Rahab, and
I think Achan too.
And Achan.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because he, I guess that really just showed how much stealing was important to God. He said what he said, devote certain things to destruction. I guess he meant devoted to destruction. And Achan stole what should have been devoted to destruction. And it caused the life of him and his family. I was wondering at first, I said, well, why did he call the life of his family? But, maybe his family knew about it and kept it secret too.
Actually, when I read about what he stole, I thought about Paul Manafort somehow.
Right.
Because, what is first mentioned is a beautiful robe from Babylonia, so obviously he was into nice clothes, so that was kind of, to me, unusual in a way. I guess he liked to show off and dressed nicely, and then the rest was money and gold. So I thought,
Well, how
he
did
likes
how
nice
do you really
things.
think he was going to get away with that one? He couldn't wear it.
I don't know. Some people just
Yeah.
like to collect stuff.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting, like the was it Gibeonites deception?
Where is that?
Joshua 9, and how they pretended to come from a very long way. They wore worn clothes, and they made it, the bread was moldy and everything. And you almost wonder throughout that there clearly, even at this time before cell phones, there was a grapevine.
Mm-hmm.
Because it occurred to me, like reading some of these stories, how did these other people know about things? Because clearly they knew that if they were nearby neighbors of the Israelites, then they would be killed. And so they went through this elaborate deception, to get a treaty. And, it was striking because it was one of the few times that Joshua didn't consult God. He took them at their word that they came from a distance and made a treaty with them.
But I also found that interesting, if you compare to other stories later where people do not follow the word of the Lord down to the letter and, destroy everything, and that means everything.
Yes.
Not keeping something nice, not keeping something that they think might be useful. In this instance, this is not punished. This is actually accepted, and they are now the water carriers and wood cutters for the altar. They have a purpose, obviously, but still, I was curious why this is the exception that was okay, and why being bound to Joshua's word was more important than keeping God's command. So I wasn't really sure how I felt about that. It made me question no matter how that deception happened, why this was then not later revised or held against or punished in any way.
Yeah,
And then-
maybe
because
because
they
they
made
made
that
the first time, at least as I was reading it, that on the concept of laying hands on Joshua, the concept of laying hands on someone, like growing up in the church, I would hear that, but to see it in the Bible in the section, drew a connection to me, as it being the first time I've seen that in the Bible.
Okay. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm gonna, keeping up with time, gonna jump into from Joshua to Judges.
Oh, and that's where Billy, who is on live stream, the first comment he had was Judges 19, which I suspect I know what.
A Levite and his concubine.
Yes.
Yeah, and so specifically I'm going to say, Billy, I don't know if this was the particular passage, but it's Judges 19 verse 22. Bring the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him. That's probably the
parallel.
the crux of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, again, so we're back in this, so it's the gay sex that is the most horrible thing. And this created the whole thing against the Benjaminites, right?
Right, and also just the callous. Billy said yes, but it's also the callousness of the Levite with his concubine, that she's raped, and then the next morning, he's like, okay, get up, let's go. And Reverend Kathy, it wasn't in the email she sent both of us, Phil. She texted me last night from a woman's study Bible that talked about the fact that it seems the use of the word concubine was almost trying to diminish the woman, because it seems clear that she was his wife, number one. And number two, it talked about whether this was an abusive relationship. And when I was reading that, what Reverend Kathy had sent, then this story made
more sense,
because it would explain why her father was so hesitant when she went home to let her go. Like, he kept making excuses, saying, no, stay another day with me. And then finally the Levi is like, give me my wife, we're going. And it would explain kind of his callousness to what happened to her, and his willingness just to throw her out there to be used and protect himself. And so,
well, that's interesting. And so much of this is open to translation,
right?
And concubine, because people at this time, it seems to me, had multiple wives, and so maybe concubine, it could have been interpreted as an abusive relationship with wife, or maybe she just wasn't the first wife. Maybe concubine was.
Maybe it meant like a girlfriend. You know what I'm saying? Because look, even in the Bible they say wives.
Mm-hmm.
It's a separation between wives and concubines. So this might be just somebody, not driving me funny, that he just was with.
A girl
he was with.
I don't know, because I don't think her father would have let her go if there was not some sort of legal connection she had with the Levite.
But I'm just saying,
I don't think she wanted to go, and I don't think her father wanted her to go. But that was an interesting insight that Reverend Kathy had shared.
Yeah, so just back to Abe. Go ahead, Canoe.
Do you still want to?
To me, the whole thing about bringing the man out to have sex with him, to me, is a contrivance. I didn't take that literally. I saw this story, and then the concubine is cut up and taken to each tribe, and then then they go after the Benjaminites. It just seems like the Levite and his concubine is a prelude to the main event, which is this thing with the infighting among the Israelites, and that this is just a setup story. My 2 cents.
Interesting, because I thought the same thing when I read the story. It reminded me of the start of World War One, and so there was this, the death of some, minor, not important European ruler from a little country no one really cared for, but everybody was waiting for this one event that they could jump on and then use their, political power influence machinery that they had been built up as, a pretext to kind of finally start the fighting. And this was, to me, it's one terrible death of an innocent victim, but it leads to hundreds of thousands or 20,000 Israelites.
Yeah.
The scale of escalation that this, kind of leads to, it really makes it. Obviously, there was some other tension in there. I don't believe that one death of somebody who was not known to anyone,
right,
can lead to something like this.
Yes.
And it sounds very unlikely to me. So I fully support your, or I would the same interpretation, actually.
Yeah, and then there's Judges ends with, then the wives of the Benjaminites are used to repopulate that tribe.
And they were like, well, it's not going to be on you, because what we're going to do is we're just going to have the door. They said someone, they're like, okay, what clan isn't here? Okay, it's almost like, the threat, like if you don't go to the meeting, then you're likely going to be the one
that gets the assignment.
Yeah. And just so you know, he wasn't specific, but A. Billy did make it a point, and maybe we should do some research after the fact and make some clarifications, because I don't want to put any misinformation out there. But he just made a statement saying that some of the statements and discussions surrounding circumcision are not factually correct.
Okay.
So he didn't specify, but I think, if that's the case, we should probably, in our live stream somewhere below the live stream, maybe figure that out, and because I don't want to put any bad information out there.
Yeah, especially regarding health. So maybe the men can take that offline afterwards, and we'll convene.
Yes.
And report back.
Yes.
All right. Now I'm going to jump right into what I think is one of Joanna's favorite books in the Bible, and that's Ruth, and the story of Ruth and Naomi. I want to go to those of you on the phone. I haven't heard from Lila for a minute, and Rose, you too. What did you take home from Ruth?
I absolutely love Ruth. Let me turn to it in my Bible just a second. The fact that, that's always.
Is someone else who?
Go ahead, Rose. I'm just pulling up my notes as well. You go ahead.
I'm just saying that's the story that is always told regarding the love between women. I just happen to think that it was not so much the sexual love, but that Ruth was very devoted to her mother-in-law, and I think it's just a very beautiful story. It has some of the most beautiful scripture that's read, like at weddings.
Yeah.
And the fact that, and I really like Boaz. I couldn't help it, because he just loved her and saw her and fell in love. It's just a great story. The whole book of Ruth.
Yeah.
I've read it several times.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Well, I like to point out things like this. The fact that you look at Naomi and Ruth, and you see that Ruth was a Moabite. And you see at the end that their offspring led to David. So again, sort of a situation where, despite everything that went before, people were intermarrying, and that wasn't held against them, in terms of their, how
foreignness.
Yes, exactly. So
and I'm thinking back to Samson and Delilah, and Delilah was a Philistine. Right, and one of the takeaways from Samson and Delilah was, you see what happens when you marry outside the people. And then you come to Ruth, and just as Joanna, you were saying, well, she's a Moabite, but here, so you've got examples on both sides where in some cases the foreigner is accepted and welcomed into the tribe, and others examples where no, you've got to kill the stranger, and they'll lead you to follow these false gods and idols. So that is another example of where the Bible kind of has its cake and eats it too.
Well, in talking about that, I'm reminded of it at the end of Ruth, in the genealogy of David. I believe it's Salmon who actually is believed to have is the same Salmon that was interacting with Rahab.
Huh.
And I think that there is a belief that Rahab is also in this lineage as well. So I like to point out the sort of
circular,
the anomalies, or maybe not so much anomalies, but the fact that of the diversity of the lineage of key figures like David, and then later Jesus in the Bible.
Interesting. Good.
One other side.
Also,
Yep.
Go ahead, Rose.
Or who was trying to talk? Because there's 3 people in line.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. This is real quickly. I also had a note that I found it interesting. There was taking off your sandals to make a contract legally enforceable. I thought that was interesting. That passage, and I think that was in the news.
Huh.
That was the one thing I.
See that?
Yeah, I wanted to mention, and I thought about you, Lila, because I was pretty sure it would, stick out to you as a lawyer. I also found it interesting stylistically because it's like a side note and a comment that, like the Bible comments on itself. Usually you don't really find these kind of, it's in Ruth 4, verse 7. That you find this kind of, almost like a stage direction in a play or something like, this is how they do it.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I found that interesting as a style. It didn't occur to me so far that we saw it someplace else up to this point.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you. That's what I love about these discussions is people bringing stuff to the table that, even though I've read it 3 times now, it just, there's always something new. Okay.
Well, I gotta admit, this is where I stopped at the beginning of Samuel, so I can't really speak any further. But I just have a question and a statement. The statement, first of all, was dealing with Samson and Delilah, how she had to keep obviously deceiving him, and he kept giving her the wrong answer. And then finally it says something about basically she nagged him unto death.
Yes.
And he told her what the secret was. And I got to thinking, that's got to be some heck of a nagging to the point where he was like, oh, she's just going to kill me. And he ended up dying as a result anyway. But also the book of Judges, my question is, the judges of those days and at that time, were they judges like we know them today, but they were also rulers of the land?
Yeah, I think so.
I was kind of confused about that.
I think so. I think how it operated was similar to how it was set up almost under Moses in a way, where
right.
What they basically did was that they would settle disputes among people, but they were also viewed as a leader. That would explain why Barak, insisted, Deborah go with her. But I think that, yes.
So they were also warriors or generals or whatever in their own right as well.
I don't know.
I think I got stuck on that judges, like as we know them today.
Because
I knew it was something more. I just didn't know how much.
I think they were leaders to some extent, but I think the distinction between them and the kings, is that they didn't necessarily have direct power over your life. You didn't necessarily and I think that's later when God warns, through Samuel to Israelite, are you sure you want a king? Because a king is going to make requirements of you. The king you're going to have to support the king. The way kingdoms work is that you're a subject of the king. And so I viewed it as these judges were leaders, but they didn't necessarily exert power over everything. They helped settle disputes. People valued their wisdom and their leadership, and that God was their king. They were subject only to God. Whereas when the kings came along, they weren't just subject to God, but then they were also subject to a human person.
One of the things I wish I had done and had intended to do was go back through the kings, because it did say how many years the judges, how many years each one ruled as a judge. Because I was just curious as to what length of time, was this just a century or century and a half or 2 centuries in the history of the Israelites? And I thought that might be an interesting footnote because I'm in the trivia and just stuff like that. So thank you for clarifying that point for me, Joan. I appreciate it.
Okay. And thank you, Rose. Gonna keep us moving along, and I'm gonna jump into Samuel, 1 Samuel. And that is basically the last book our week ended on. But lots of good stuff in Samuel, because then you've got Samuel, you've got Saul, and you've got David, and David and Goliath, and I mean those are 3 meaty characters, and that's the bridge, right, between the era of judges and, Joanna, as you were saying, kings, a king that you have to then bow down to. Go ahead.
Phil, you mentioned 3 men.
Yes.
Hannah. Abigail.
Yes.
But he also forgot Jonathan, so I'm just saying.
Yes.
But my point is, my point is that
I'm being a bad man.
Without Hannah,
yes,
Samuel would not have become who he was. I mean, the bottom line. I mean, his father just seemed kind of whatever you want to do to the wife. He loved her, but if it wasn't for Hannah's, for Samuel's mother, he would not. I mean, so I would argue it was because of a woman.
Sure. That
ushered into at least
the era of kings.
Well, the era of kings, or at least the warning to Israel. Be careful what you ask for. So, and then Abigail, the fact that she's referred to an intelligent and beautiful woman, she basically at least saved her husband from being killed by David, and actually saved David from himself, because David actually thanked her for it, so that he would not have blood on his hands by seeking vengeance on on Nabal, Abigail's husband at the time.
Sure. Okay, let me pause you there. So Hannah is at the beginning of 1 Samuel.
Right.
With Samuel's birth, Samuel's mother. Abigail, where?
25.
I also, this is Carla. I find it interesting and meaningful that Hannah comes up right after Ruth and Naomi, and then moves into Abigail. There's so much of the Bible in various places does not name people who are identified as women, and there's just something here about these particular characters showing up that is very interesting and powerful in the way that they are presented, at least in the way these books were put together. So that was something that it's interesting to read about Hannah after reading about Ruth and Naomi.
I agree. Carla, if I can piggyback on that, I think, in the New Testament, mothers are important, right? In the New Testament, we've got Mary, and in the Old Testament, the mother of Samuel, Hannah, the mother of Jesse and David is out of Ruth's lineage. So the mothers are honored and revered and remembered. I just wanted to concur with your line of thinking.
Or even not just the mothers, going back to Judges, Deborah.
And we didn't really talk about Deborah.
There was Deborah. It didn't say whether she was a mother or not. She was, I think, described as a prophet.
A prophetess.
And then Jael, I think that's how you pronounce her name, who sort of deceived Sisera, who was the commander of the army, and wound up, killing him. And so, I mean, I just think it's just interesting because it's in some parts, women seem to be, put down and diminished, but then you read these other stories and you have women who are well respected, a leader, women who the angel of God goes directly to and not their husbands, which counteracts this whole notion that women are supposed to be silent in the church, etc.
It was Jael Heber's wife who picked up the tent peg and hammer and went quietly and put the tent peg. No, these women, these Old Testament women, are not to be taken lightly.
But Billy, I don't know, in the last few minutes, and Canute brought it up, Jonathan and David, if we want to spend some time talking about them.
Yeah, I do want to bring up, while we have time, Tim Hassert sent 1 Samuel 18, verse 1. 1 Samuel 18, verse 1, where you've got Jonathan, David and Jonathan. 18. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. And from that day Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. And so Tim Hassert sent that in to the group, and just toss that out on the table for discussion. Did that stick out to anybody else? Silence. Okay.
Well, it was, but there were. What I picked up this time is that there's the references throughout the story of David and Jonathan about, when they keep meeting each other, talking about, like where Jonathan wasn't convinced that his father actually wanted to kill David, and then when he found out, they did this signal, but then they kissed and they wept together. Regardless of whether or not you think that, they were actually with each other or not, they clearly had a deeper relationship than what you might, perceive as just, friends.
Yeah, to me it's a very close friendship that is closer than family in the case of, of David, I would say, who probably cares more for, Jonathan and vice versa than for, Saul. So in that sense, I mean, obviously, Saul gives his daughter, in marriage to David. So he clearly is married at some point. But still, yeah, they keep their very, at least strong friendship or very close friendship throughout the whole story.
Yeah, and I noticed that, and there's a couple of things I noticed in the Samuel is, well, throughout is, you start seeing the disobedience. You start seeing sort of, the Israelites sort of slipping and then, asking for forgiveness and then coming back or whatever. But then the other thing is, I like to point this out, David was the youngest. Mm-hmm. Again, mm-hmm. This whole thing about the firstborn, your firstborn son, and it's just interesting to me to watch who God selects. And it isn't necessarily the person that other people would say, well, it must be this person that is selected. And then the last thing I was going to say is that this time, I'll put this out here because it comes up every time. What was going on with Saul? And this time, I was kind of wondering whether he was going through some sort of dementia. And the reason why I say that is because it just seems like, there were times he recognized David. There's other times he didn't recognize David. There were times he seems to forget about things. And the fact that listening to music would kind of soothe these bad spirits, it just struck me reading it this time whether something like that was going on with Saul.
That's a mental
Actually,
health
I put
issues.
down mental
That's
health
some
and
deep
depression.
That's some deep mental health issues because, as for myself, if I'm really troubled, nice soft music, it just soothes.
Mm. Sure. Good stuff. So before we wrap up tonight, kind of go around the table here. Any takeaways or items kind of on your mind that we haven't talked about this evening that you'd like to bring up to the group? Pamela?
I think y'all just about covered everything that I would have had on my mind. It's just those books are full of a lot of characters.
Mm.
I can't hear.
Yeah, I guess
Pam?
Yeah, that's Pam.
I couldn't hear what she said. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just said, Rose, I just said the books that we covered are full of a lot of characters.
Yes.
Quote unquote.
This week's reading for sure. Sure. Let's go to you on the phone, Lila and Carla and Rose. Any last nuggets here you'd like to toss out to the group that we haven't kind of chewed over?
I'd like to also sort of kind of echo on what Pam was saying, but I would just want to say some of the references that sort of bring me back to things I've heard before, like the battle is not yours, it's the Lord's. That phrase came out in one of the readings, and I was like, okay. And, I remember it from that Yolanda Adams song, but there were a couple of phrases or things in this portion of the Bible that resonated with me because of just things I'd heard in the past and not necessarily knowing where they came from. So it's good to sort of get a sense for where in the Bible it actually comes from.
Good.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of good stuff. I made a note of something I was looking for here. Joshua 24:15, when he's basically saying his goodbyes and charging the Israelites, choose this day who you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And then he dies and is buried shortly after that. And just for myself, I'm really enjoying the reading. It's very, very rich. And I was taught that a lot of the sex stuff and the word sex that we find in today's Bible, you didn't get a lot of that in the original Hebrew translations, like when they say things like, send the men out so we might know them. The word to know in the Hebrew has many, 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 many different references, and the whole bend towards a lot of the sexuality and a lot of the anti-gay stuff really didn't come into print in the modern Bibles until the mid or late 19th century. So I don't know if anyone else had heard that or knew that, but that a lot of today's Bibles with the so-called quote-unquote sex words, some of it was not the original meaning or intention, and it's been pounded into our heads, especially regarding.
I think it depends on the passage. I can look and maybe email around some resources that go into kind of where different words show up in some of the scriptures and what the different meanings are.
Yeah, but some of the translations are really different.
Right.
And some of that's good. It's good because it helps us today to understand more. But on the other hand, some of it's very subjective as well.
Okay. And wrapping up, I just don't want to leave out A. Billy. He's been following along. Any?
Well, he just said, wish I could vocalize my thoughts and that we had more time.
Me too.
And Carla, did you have any closing?
Oh, I'm very much related to translations of the Bible and all of that. I'm just, as I read through these again, just what are the messages of love in the Old Testament that has so much terror in it? What are the messages of love in these books? So that's what I've been reflecting on and continue to from what we talked about tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I'm going to wrap us up. I was remiss tonight at not praying us in. Can I ask if it's all right? Can we pray out?
Yes.
Okay. Dear Lord, just as you taught us tonight, that man looks outward at appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Please see us not as we are on the outside, but for who we are and who you know us on the inside. See us safely home, and thank you for helping us understand your word. Amen.
Thank you for joining us on live stream.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Do y'all know anything about poetry?